Hey everyone, this is Joe coming to you from the Southwest. Um, Welcome to Eagles Chat New Mexico. If you like the channel, go ahead and hit subscribe and enjoy a view of the Eagles from, a Mexican's point of view and a lifelong Eagles fan. Want to start today with a congratulations to Eric Allen on making the Hall of Fame. Got to hear a little bit of his speech. Sounds like he had a great time when he was with the Eagles. Little sad he was retiring as a Raider, but with that being his hometown team, growing up in San Diego, the team that he rooted for, you can see why he wanted to do that. So congrats to him. Um, on the sad part though, it's kind of sad. I was looking at some other things about the Hall of Fame and Seth Joyner was right there. He was really close to being elected. Um, and it's an unfair snub. I mean, I think because of the greatness of Reggie White that he played with on those great Eagles defenses in the early 90s, late 80s, that, he gets passed over because of that. And that's kind of sad. Um, Other big news this week was the Eagles trading Booker to the Raiders to receive Jagorian Bennett. I've read some different things about this. Apparently, Lane Johnson really thinks that there's a big high side, a high ceiling for Booker. He really feels like Booker could be one of their players, could have been a Pro Bowl type of player with the right direction. And I foresee that as something that's possible for him. Um, We'll have to see how things work out with the Raiders because, as we know, coaching has a lot to do with how well a player does. Um, Moving forward throughout his career, we see that particularly with quarterbacks. With Caleb Williams in Chicago. What happens if he has a good guy there? One of my favorites was Sam Bradford. I thought he could have been great, but coaching again got in his way. Um, he had some of his most productive time with the Eagles until he got hurt. So there were some things there. Um, so moving forward from that, tonight's an exciting night. Tonight's the Eagles preseason opener, and we have a lot of storylines around this game for it being the first preseason game. There's the thought of the Eagles are going to play just their second string, which is always, that's a Nick Sirianni thing. He usually does that um, for the Eagles. And then, there's the story that Cincinnati's going to play a lot of starters. I've heard everything from 2 to 3 series for Joe Burrow and company to possibly a whole first quarter or a half. Um, so those things are really, really possible. And I think that that's going to make for a lopsided score. I don't think that people are going to want to see, the Eagles get blown out in the preseason. But, if they don't play any starters versus the Bengals playing starters, that could probably influence the outcome. But as we know with Nick Sirianni, a lot of times the Eagles don't play starters in the preseason. Sometimes I think that that's one of the things that leads to the Eagles' slow starts in the fall. I think that was part of the reason they were 2-2 after 4 games last year. Hey, if the outcome is still winning a Super Bowl, that's awesome. Um, but I so I shouldn't really question it. But there are some big things. I want to see what happens with Tanner McKee. Since he'll be out there against some starters, he'll be out there playing with primarily second teamers. Um, I want to see what he looks like. I really do under those circumstances. I mean, he looked good in the game against Dallas. He looked good in the game against the Giants. So I think that there's a huge upside to him, and we can see exactly what he's got. I think the Eagle offense will look a little bit different when McKee's on the field. Um, I don't think you'll see planned quarterback runs like you would with Jalen Hurts. So I'm looking for this to be a more of an intermediate and downfield passing attack with some screens and things like that thrown in just to help him get comfortable starting out um, the preseason. Will DTR and McCord play? I suspect they'll play in the second half. I really see DTR probably getting some like third and fourth string reps. I see McCord getting some of the same. Um, I really think that this will be a chance for them to shine. Um, the other big thing was linebacker. I've heard some stories about that. Um, because there is some competition with Kobe Dean being injured. Who's going to be that number two guy lining up next to Zach Bond. That's one of the things that I see. This is going to be Campbell from what everybody's saying in training camp. He was supposed to be limited action until about this time of year. But from what I hear, he's been really disrupting things on defense, to the point that there are concerns about him hurting people in camp, because he's not lightening up. And part of that, I think, and I've seen this in some reports, is goes back to his Alabama days where Nick Saban kept the intensity level, way up here the entire training camp for Alabama players. Um, so he probably only knows one way to play, and that is all out. So I know Saban retired, but Campbell would have been there for about 3 years under Saban. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Again, I've been reading some really good things about him, basically on the Eagles app, on the NBC Sports Philly channel. Sounds like Trotter's having a really good preseason, can make some things happen. The other thing that does cause for some concern, goes back to the trade with the Eagles receiving Bennett from the Raiders. Is Sidney Brown starting at safety? Where's Makuba going to fall in all of this? Because he's not been a full participant at camp because of his shoulder injury. And the other thing has been you know, the play of, let me see here. It's been the play of Ringo. So I've seen where some people have said Bennett's just a slightly better version than Kaylee Ringo. I heard the Eagles made the trade because Vic Fangio's not happy with Adoree Jackson or Kaylee Ringo at that other corner spot. But I mean, part of that is when you have a player like Kenyon Mitchell over there locking down whatever, is the best receiver for another team, you know, those guys aren't at that Pro Bowl level. So, or that all pro level that Kenyon is. So there's going to be a difference. And I know the Eagles are going to search for that. But Vic's a smart guy. I see Fangio running some defensive schemes that allow Kenyon to cover the best guy, and then there'll be some linebacker help or some safety over the top help that will help that other corner if they're a little bit weaker on that other side. Um, Not every time you get to play with a Darius Slay and a Kenyon Mitchell. So there's those things. Um, the other things I'm looking forward tonight is just how crisp does the offense was. Can Patullo call plays? Can he call sequential plays that set up other plays? Does he fake a reverse, run a reverse? Um, does he do some play action with Corey Dillon? Because, we all know Saquon's not going to play tonight. Excuse me, AJ Dillon, going back way too many years now. So is he, are there going to be some play action passes with him? What's the offensive line going to look like? I know there's competition for that right guard spot, but traditionally, Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, I don't see them playing tonight. So it'll be interesting to see how the Eagles' second team offense fares against that, Cincinnati playing their stuff. So I'm not looking for much out of the Eagles. It's just going to be some little things, to see about the offensive changes, how's those competitions land at offensive line. But when you have Stoutland, your offensive line is going to be fairly decent, even your second and third teamers. And like I said on this channel a lot, I'm a big fan of Miles Hinton. So I want to see him do well, and I want to see how he is. He's a big road grader from Michigan, played in a running offense. So are those things going to continue um, with the Eagles tonight? So I'm excited about that. Unfortunately, here in the Southwest, we don't get NBC 10 out of Philly. Um, so a lot of this, I'm going to have to catch up, watch some film when it all hits YouTube on other channels, probably NBC Philly, and watch a little bit of the Eagle highlights also. So that's going to be a little bit of a challenge on my part. That's got nothing to do with you guys. I'm going to try to bring this channel to life a little more often during the season, and especially now that we're into the preseason. Um, and talk about a little bit of a post game afterwards. See if we saw the things that we talked about here. Like I said, offensive line, how do the linebackers look? How's McKee look? Um, you know, my son's biggest fear is, Jalen Hurts getting injured and McKee having to start, but he loves McKee, but he also doesn't want to see the Eagles ever trade McKee. But we have seen enough out of him during the season last year that I think he's got the potential to be an NFL starter. He's got that size, arm strength. Um, could play in a classic drop back set, that some teams still run a little bit. So I could see, I can see that. I'd like to see how the local kid McCord does. Um, it was funny as his Madden rating was higher than McKee's, and I think a lot of that had to do with his Syracuse days. Um, so but we'll see. We'll see tonight. A lot of the rust to get knocked off veterans, things like that. So I'm really looking forward to that. On the other side of that coin, speaking of rankings, um, it was really great to see Kenyon Mitchell come in at number 49. So with him at 49 to Gene at 50, it was probably splitting hairs there, just because Kenyon plays on the outside as cornerback. I'm sure that gave him a slight edge there. And Jalen Carter being number 43. Again, I'll take any Eagles in the top 100 because, especially, we've seen how things have come out in the wash lately. One of the things that really offended me was the Eagles having like the fifth, sixth best coaching staff in the league. I think I talked a little bit about that last week. Again, people are yucking it up. Hey, Minnesota has the best coaching staff in the league. Where did they go? They didn't win their division. They didn't win a playoff game. I mean, some of that was Sam Darnold's meltdown. But some of that has to do with coaching. Coaching has to say, hey, settle down. Hey, this is what you're seeing. This is what you have to do. And before those games got out of hand, maybe you put somebody else in just to take a look. I mean, I don't know who they really would have put in, not up on who's on the Viking roster. But, I think that those are things to consider. Um, Other things, Makuba, like I said, he's still listed as second string. I'm going to see if, he's not going to get any time tonight. I'm pretty sure they're still nursing that shoulder. Um, but I would like to see him get some reps in there, even if it's just chasing somebody down the field or them covering for him. Um, I think DeJean will probably play a little bit. Um, but I don't really see him playing at all, really. But I think he might. Kenyon Mitchell, pretty much the same way. Um, Injuries, Zach Bond, this is good for him. The Kobe Dean, he's still out. Um, Devonta Smith was hurt, but he came back and things have looked really great. I've seen that basically he's been a monster since coming back. And has beaten just about anybody who has tried to cover him. But we know he's a great route runner, has great speed, won the Heisman Trophy, all those things. But, I think Devonta is just going to be, the hamstring thing was the thing, and he's just kind of over it and moving forward. Now let's see. Mina Kimes on ESPN ranked the Eagles as the best in the NFL, and then the Chiefs, Ravens, Bills, and then the Lions. Um, that was kind of an interesting view because I'm not a Nick Wright fan. What Eagle fan is a Nick Wright fan? We all boo him. But I actually agreed with his assessment of Lamar Jackson. We talk about these guys being great and how do they show up, during the regular season. That gets them their MVP votes, things like that. But what do they do in the playoffs? That's the big thing. What are they doing in the playoffs? And I agreed with his assessment of Lamar Jackson. We haven't seen him play great in the playoffs. Although he did play well against Buffalo, Mark Andrews, people want to blame Andrews. But if you watch that video closely, I challenge you to try to catch a football when your feet suddenly go out from underneath of you when you're not expecting it. So I think even though the ball was in his hands, there's probably that natural instinct of, hey, I got to catch myself when you slip. I know because I've dislocated his shoulder twice because of that, falling on ice. So I kind of had some empathy for him. Having sort of a different reaction when your feet suddenly go out from underneath of you when you don't expect it. It makes it much more difficult. But I kind of agreed with, hey, the Ravens and stuff need to step it up in the playoffs. Same with Josh Allen. Josh Allen has played well at times. Um, he has probably outplayed Patrick Mahomes in a couple of the playoff games between those two. Those two remind me of the old days of Brady and Peyton Manning, and finally Peyton finally beat him, finally beat Brady in the playoffs, and the Colts going to win a world championship. Actually, win a world championship, win the Super Bowl. So, but I do leave you with this question, and you can answer it down in the comments. Is greatness measured by regular season MVPs or how and stats or playoff wins and losses? You know, that's I think that's the eternal debate in professional football is a guy can be great during the season, but what does he look like in the postseason? What is he doing in the postseason to get his team over the hump? Is he stepping up his play? Is he taking on a bigger leadership role? Is he inspiring the defense? These are things we see out of Jalen Hurts. His calm, Saquon Barkley's calm. We saw them on the Super Bowl videos. Hey, stay right here. Don't get too high, don't get too low. Stay right here. And, what kind of leadership are we seeing out of that? So, is that the kind of leadership? I mean, we don't get those mic'd up opportunities about the Bills and the Chiefs and things like that. Those are really hard to find on YouTube from their playoff games, but it gives us something to go by when we talk about leadership. And that's what I want to see. And that's the other things I want to see. Um, Kind of going all the way back to the beginning of this video to kind of bring it full circle, going back to Tanner McKee. How is he commanding the huddle? Does the offense look confident when he's on the field, or do they look shaky? I know he's playing with backups, but will they look shaky? So that's pretty much all I have for big things on the horizon. AJ Brown's quote of the week, when they showed him his Madden rating, he said three things in life are always apparent. One, birds fly, fish swim, and AJ is always open. So that was great. That was great. That kind of made my day that day. So the last thing I have, actually one of the last things, let me go back to AJ because I totally forgot. He's still, hey, Parsons would be great. I would love to see Parsons go to the Rams. That's been another thing out there. Aaron Donald said, hey, make this happen and I'll come out of retirement. That could be pretty scary for, those who would have to play the Rams, especially Eagles. And would see the Rams later on in the playoffs again and projecting, being optimistic here, but cautiously so. We all know the 25-year stat of no team has ever repeated, since, or I guess it's more like 20 years now, no team has ever repeated as NFC East champions since the Eagles did it like 3, 4, 5 times in a row in the early 2000s. So that's kind of interesting, but we'll have to see where it ends up. You never know about the injury bug, and that has caused me some concern with what the Eagles have done here in the preseason, is being able to see that, and it kind of makes me worry a little bit um, about how the guys are coming into camp. But again, a lot on the plate, a lot to look forward to tonight. I'm going to try to put up a video either tonight or tomorrow, recapping the game. I'm kind of excited about that. It's just, let's get football going. Let's get football rolling. We all football fans, and that's why we're here. The last things I have for us today, weeks 7 through 10 of the schedule. Eagles are at the Vikings. That could be a big game. That could be a playoff preview. I look for that to go in the Eagles' favor. J.K. McCarthy is a highly touted rookie. I think Vic comes up with something that's going to just confuse the heck out of him. And, they don't really have a significant backup, so I could see that happening. Giants back in Philly, that's shouldn't be a challenge for the Eagles. They should roll them pretty well. Some of that, is going to depend on how teams are blocking Abdul Carter. I'm sure that, Stoutland, since he's also run game coordinator, will help come up with something that will stop, slow down Abdul Carter. As a Penn State fan, great to see him. I hope he has 15 really good games and two really bad ones when the Giants play the Eagles. Um, and then Monday night, actually, I guess about week 9, the Eagles have their bye. That's kind of good. I mean, it's right in the middle of the season, so gives them a chance to get healthy, get rested right before heading, to Green Bay for a Monday night game. So it's kind of an extra extended bye that week. Um, the game with Green Bay, either way, I'll do a little more in depth with these teams, like I've said before. But with the Green Bay game, that might be a little different. The Eagles have struggled in Green Bay before, um, but not with this quality of team. So I see this being pretty much like the game in Brazil. It's going to come down to the last play, last couple plays. Some of it's going to depend on Jordan Love. Where is he at? And, being able to pick up things of what Vic's doing. But he did look good at times, but he does have the turnover bug. Um, and Eagles are just a more physical team. Green Bay is a little more of a finesse team. But I see this being a really good game, and it's going to be tight. And I think the Eagles win that one in a squeaker. Um, last thing I want to get to here is some Dave Spadaro comments. Let me. Kind of funny as I look back at his article. I'd read it before, but you know, Spadaro has some interesting things. We talked about the quarterbacking, new guys in their preseason debut. He still thinks some edge rushers, the edge is still up for grabs opposite of Smith, but I don't really see that as much. But I think Ajari might be able to show something different under game situations. Same with Uche. Um, Eagles, like I said, not a lot of starting positions up for grabs. That's one of his things. Um, will starters play? We've talked about that as well. He says what constitutes a win tonight. I think winning on the scoreboard. And the other thing that I think constitutes a big win for tonight is how healthy do the Eagles come out of it? Are there any significant injuries? If McKee stays healthy, you know, I think that's important. Some of the backup receivers, I could see one of the things that I can see is some of the receivers who have been getting second, third team reps starting. Um, so that's one of the other things that I think is really good. And I just want the Eagles to look sharp on the inside, like I said, and rookie Miles Hinton. I think if he comes out of this healthy and has a good game, I think we start seeing him as a swing offensive lineman, the Eagles moving him around and possibly, I know he's not a guard. Hey, but look what happened with Becton. He wasn't a guard either. And, Stoutland University turned him into a great guard that got him a bigger contract. I wish Howie would have kept him around and then we could have kept the whole starting offensive line intact. But, those things happen. And, who's the doubt Howie? He's won us 2 Super Bowl. I mean, technically, he builds a team, but he's gotten us to 2 Super Bowls, 3 in the last 7 years. And like I said, as my term as an Eagles fan over the last 50 years, this has been a great, 25-year stretch. Just knowing that the Eagles were able to challenge for Super Bowls and make the playoffs almost every year, a few down years here and there. But, been able to rebuild quickly, um, and go from there. So you all have a great day. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the game tonight, especially if you're on the East Coast and you get a chance to watch it on NBC 10. So that's all I got for Eagles Chat New Mexico this week. Have a great day. And don't forget to hit subscribe and like if you enjoy the video. Thank you.